It is dotNYC number 7. We're still figuring out what we're doing. We're still changing everything we're doing. We're trying to understand how to make a great podcast out of the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism about the intersection of technology and media and journalism and fashion and finance and advertising and everything in New York. And the great thing is, this week's show is live from New York. I've always wanted to say that. At Social Media Weekend. And so there's two great things going. Whoa, we have an audience. Woo! We bribed them and drugged them to do that. And the best news of all is Screenivasan, the master, the god, the wonder of social media, the owner of Social Media Weekend. We're so proud to have him here at CUNY. And we're going to be co-hosts for this week's episode with three great guests coming up. Sree.
Thanks for having me here. Folks, give it up for the CUNY Journalism School for hosting us here and making us feel at home. Jeff Jarvis and the entire team here, and Dean Sarah Bartlett and your team. It's amazing and very warm, beautiful place for us to be.
We are so grateful you're here and bring your incredible Sree fan club, right guys? So one more thing to explain first before we get into the actual show. We're in the show, but I'm going to explain this. So we're doing something I am really excited about on top of all this, which is we're going to broadcast this live. We are broadcasting this live right now on Facebook Live, using the first camera that was developed for the Facebook Live API, called the Mevo. And there's one you can't see up here, but here's what it looks like.
Wow, look how small that is.
So here's what's, and tell me if I get this wrong, right? I'll try to explain it. The Mevo is a 150-degree camera. So there's one little camera like this sitting right in front of us. It's taking this whole stage. And it's like having a 4-camera shot in one. If you go around this room, we have these big cameras, very expensive, replaced by that, which is about $400. It ties into an app on an iPhone or an iPad, Android soon, I hope. And on that app, what we're going to try to do is show you what happens here. If we can focus down on the camera, can you get down on this? So what happens is, and your name again is? Nathan. This is a simple view. So if Nathan clicks onto Shree's face, that is a close-up of Sree. That will be going out as a close-up. When I sit there, if you move the box over and click on my face, it'll be a close-up of me. And then pull back. M-E-V-O. I think the URL is getmevo.com. Yes? Getmevo. So this is written for the Facebook Live API. Right now the audio is going into that. There'll be soon audio input available. And it's $400. I was talking with the editor or the publisher of a major Mexican newspaper and telling him about this, and he said, cancel the plans for the new TV studio. He wants this. So I'm excited. This is not out. It's not shipping until July. I saw it at Facebook F8. I ordered one 10 minutes later. I can't wait to get it. And we're very excited to live stream, and Mevo brought the camera in to play with here, and it's kind of a first for us, and so that's where we are. Right. So before we get the first guests up, Sree, you have been doing Social Media Weekend for how long?
This is the 5th edition.
5th.
Yeah.
2nd here at CUNY.
That's right.
Every year you might think, okay, I've done it. That's it. It's over. What this year would you say is the biggest new thing?
Well, I think what you're experiencing right now, the Facebook Live, the fact that messaging has become so important. I was just thinking about the things that I didn't care about last year that are now consuming my life. Things like WhatsApp, where we're talking, our families on 4 continents, and we're able to communicate in a deep, meaningful way. Or Facebook Live, or the way that Periscope is changing. Or Twitter, we heard this morning from @Nikita on Twitter. Twitter's doing lots of new things to be more useful, more relevant in people's lives. So I think that social media is constantly changing and is getting more useful and becoming a kind of concrete part of our lives in a way that we may not have thought of. And I think the election here in America tells us that we have to pay attention with everything that's happening as a result of it.
Now, in the previous panel we had about good and evil social media, the point was made that there's no such thing as social media, or the social media is the wrong term.
Word, yeah.
And I kind of agree with that too from a different perspective. In a sense, we in media are egotistical and think that anything that looks like media is media. But social media is something different, I think. I think it's not just about making content. It's not about filling space or time. It's about connecting people. Is social media even the right term?
When I talk about social media now, I really talk about the whole mix of things, digital, mobile, and it's hard to separate them out. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind, that we're not just talking about say, just Twitter or just Facebook. And Hal, one of our colleagues here, Hal Strauss, said to me that listening to Helen Clark, who is head of UNDP, with this amazing organization that makes millions of lives better every day. She's running for Secretary General of the UN, and to hear her talk about how she uses social, she's talking about the digital universe, and that the next Secretary General, her or someone else, has to understand this natively almost. It doesn't have to be a native, but that's how change is going to happen. Because I'll tell you, the Caliphate understands, the Islamic State understands what they're doing on this. The good guys also need to understand.
Well, speaking of good guys and bad, Donald Trump and Hillary will now fight it out on social media. I started off the day just noting that the New York Times this morning was news-splaining social media to the world in the Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump tweets, and then about the 3 parenthesis anti-Semitic acts. It's phenomenal to me that media constantly have to explain this. Do you still get called on all the time to say what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, well, you and I remember this from a few years ago. I would tweet every time a journalist would call me and say, Twitter has come of age because X happened, right? Yeah. When the plane landed in the Hudson, when the rover landed on Mars, all of these were Twitter comes of age. And the journalists like doing the same story again and again. And you once commented on one of those things. And so I think now it has arrived, but it's also changing and morphing in good and bad ways. And I think that journalists, many of them, leave social media opportunities on the table. I find that they're not optimizing. That's why we have this whole conference here for 2 days, and I hope people will continue to watch on Twitter, on Facebook, on mine, and on SM Weekend, the SMWKND hashtag, and the Twitter account, that we're offering practical, useful things that you can do to be better at this. Our colleague, Jeremy Kaplan, who's a professor here, tweeted and posted and did an actual session on how to use your phone better. And I thought I knew a lot about phone tools, but there were 20 tools that he did that I had never heard of, and at least 5 of them I want to use today. The problem is, how do you fit this in to everything else and keep your day job and your families and everything else?
Right. I don't tend to ever put it down. Have you been caught in those moments where people tell you that you have to put it all away?
Yeah, well, we initiated this at our house. We have 13-year-old twins, and when they were 9, we announced no technology at the dining table. And they were not using any technology. This was us planning for the day they would be on Twitter and Instagram and all of that. And so it was a good exercise for us, and it's still very meaningful that there's no technology. But now it helps us that they know that there's no technology. They're on Instagram only, but there are obviously kids who are on Snapchat and everything else. They turn 13, they can be on Facebook, but we're holding them off.
So I know lots of smart social people. You know lots of smart social people. My rule is that anyone over the age of 21 can't figure out Snapchat. Have you figured out Snapchat?
I have not figured out Snapchat, but in part, I don't have the time to figure it out. I have a Snapchat account. You can probably find me on it, but I've never sent or received a Snapchat.
Oh, we got to fix that today. What's your account?
I presume it's Sree. I'll have to go in and look. I'll take a look. But I've never done this because I don't have the time. But I should tell you, I said that about Facebook. Yeah. I said that about Twitter. I said that on Instagram. But this is where I've drawn the line. I had to join WeChat this year. WeChat, you may know, is the biggest social media and messaging app in China. And that's because at the Met, China represents the largest number of in-person visitors. Wow. And I was at lunch with the co-founder of Tencent, which is the parent company of WeChat, and he said, "Are you on WeChat?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You have to make an account." So he forced me right there to make an account. And I learned so much about this, but it's very interesting to see how different accounts work, but there are just too many accounts, not enough time.
And I was just in Europe last week at a conference, one of 3 conferences, one by the Springer Publishing House in Germany on distributed content, otherwise known as social media, and Line
oh my
is
God.
huge in Korea and Japan, and
yeah.
the Economist is concentrating its efforts on Line because Asia is where its growth is.
No, that's
who knew. All right, speaking of growth, speaking of the world, let's bring on BuzzFeed.
Yeah.
Millie Tran is here from BuzzFeed. Come on up. So, not to put too fine a point on it, but you're kind of in charge of the world at BuzzFeed, right?
I'm not. My boss would not appreciate that. I am in charge of making the best of BuzzFeed available to the world. So that means deciding what that thing is and then making it available in different languages, on different platforms, in different formats. So the reason why my title isn't global translation is because there's so much more to sharing a piece of reporting or a photo that goes beyond just translating words. You adapt the words, that's translating. You adapt the culture, you adapt the humor. Sarcasm is notoriously hard. So yeah, it's adapting like every factor of a piece of content, basically.
And how many countries and how many languages are you native in now?
So I work with all of our non-English editions. So that's Brazil, Mexico, Spain, France, Germany, and Japan.
Wow.
Go ahead. Sree.
No, one of the things that I wonder about how BuzzFeed's success, if you had to think of 2 or 3 things that make it so successful and so international, what are they?
It would probably be, so I wouldn't be able to do my job if we didn't already set up these really strong local offices. The reason why we're not just purely translating is because we wouldn't know the markets, we wouldn't know the audience. So much of what I do depends on our local editors knowing their audiences, knowing what works there, and being able to make smart decisions and do smart experiments, basically. So I would say a really strong local presence. We have really great editors in all those editions I just mentioned. And I think the next thing would be a really strong tech and editorial background. A lot of what we do is fueled by data. It's not just saying like, I think cheese works everywhere. It's testing that empirically and using data to supplement all of our findings, because otherwise you would just kind of fall into like geopolitical and like cultural stereotypes, which sometimes are true. So I think that like really great marriage between a like great data tech team to build the tools for us to use. And then I think the last thing would be like valuing lessons over failings. So we throw a lot of spaghetti on the wall or whatever food you want to mention. And
Watermelon.
I know, watermelon, I guess. Like, yeah, I missed the big one. So it's that culture of experimentation, because we haven't figured out every market yet. So that willingness to try and get something completely wrong. Like, for example, a really recent example is the Stanford letter that our reporter, Katie Baker, got. We have never done a translation that long. I think it was like 7,200 words. And we translated it into French, Portuguese, Spanish, with German and Japanese forthcoming. And it blew up in France. And we weren't expecting that. We thought maybe other outlets had translated or summarized it or whatever. And we had done it fast enough. Our editor in France was like perceptive enough to know her audience would really catch on to this. And in Brazil and Germany, the issue of sexual harassment has been in the news for the past 6 months or so. So it was a really great timing, and it was just taking that risk of translating this very long, sensitive, and really strong piece. But it's hard because it's really long.
So what are some of the lessons you've learned about what crosses borders and what doesn't cross borders, and trends, memes, interests, and such?
So it's hard because, you know, when I started this role in November, I struggled to kind of find some organization, some media company kind of doing similar things. I found that a lot of media organizations do translate stuff, kind of not as dynamically. Some organizations do translate things, but maybe not as like bottom up. It was like Discover saying this show would be good here, and like we're going to produce it all. And also, they have like an amazing translation apparatus. They translate into like 40 plus languages, of which I don't know that I can name like 40 languages. But so I struggled to find kind of like a similar counterpart. And it's funny, I didn't expect it to find it in IKEA. IKEA is really interesting. Their global growth has been focused on kind of finding the overlap of cultures. One of the lessons they learned, I'm like stealing IKEA's lessons from my lesson. But one of their big lessons was when they were launching in Korea, not to try to make IKEA in Korea, but to find like the best of IKEA and make it Korean, if that makes sense. There's like a really subtle difference, and it's about finding that overlap of what IKEA does well and bring it to a Korean audience. So that like really shaped my thinking about how we should approach kind of our discovery of what works where. It's about finding that overlap. It's not like we know that this thing works here. It's we made this thing, and where else can it work?
She's at Millie, Millie, on.
You're at Sree.
At Sree. So we're in the First Name Club on Twitter. Please follow her. She is in her title. You were saying it's not global translations, global adaptation, and I think that's fascinating. I also want to give a shout out to one of your colleagues, Anup Kafle, who many of you know.
We translated his Nepali story, and that was the first time. And sorry to interrupt you. This goes back to kind of our marriage of tech and editorial. I was like, hey, does our CMS support Nepali? And of course, our product lead was like, our CMS supports almost every language. So I was like, thank you. I will proceed.
He's from Nepal, and he's the deputy foreign editor, lives in London. ANUPKAPHLE, Anup Kafle. Follow him. So he does very serious stories, but he also cooks goat all the time and posts online, and just and you folks do a lot of food stuff, as we were saying.
Yes.
So I'm curious what's the flow from America/English into the other countries and languages versus the reverse flow?
So that, I feel like that's the assumption that we work with, right? That we're taking all English content and importing it.
Right.
We're not, because that would be like cultural imperialism. And the great thing we found is that because of the strong local offices, they're creating really great content, which means because our English audience is our largest like language audience, we actually like make all their stuff go viral. So we have someone on our team who kind of focuses on bringing good non-English content back into English, and he's just really great because he knows BuzzFeed so well that he can recognize that voice even through like really horrendous Google translations.
What's fascinating to me too is I think we see an internationalization trend that's different now. Is that you see Netflix? I watch The Heavy Water War on Amazon.
Yeah.
I'm watching Borgen, which I think is pronounced something like Boyen, from Denmark.
Like an umlaut in there.
On Amazon, on Play. There's a reverse flow of American entertainment imperialism now, which is really healthy and really good. That you see Netflix, I think they've said that they plan to produce shows.
Yeah, like Narcos is an example of that. Right.
Elsewhere to give them worldwide presence, but it's not an American-produced show.
Yeah.
And so you follow that, I think, in terms of trying to create bridges across cultures.
Yep, that's my job. It's literally just connecting all the great things we have and making it something.
So I want to give a shout out to a show called Lilyhammer. If you haven't seen it, it's Steve Van Zandt. It's a Scandinavian production. If you think of Silvio from The Sopranos, goes into witness protection in Lilyhammer. It's actually Lillehammer, but he remembers the Olympics and he mispronounces it as Lilyhammer. It is a fantastic program, but it's not American. It happens to have an American actor in it. There are people all over the world watching right now and archived on Facebook Live. Can you explain how people who want to work for you, with you, what skills they need, and what's the process by which whenever you post a job, they can learn about it?
So BuzzFeed.com/jobs. There's so many jobs on there. And now you can sort by like which office like around the world. So that's really cool. I'm actually like knee deep into hiring right now, and it turns out hiring in 3 countries in 3 different languages is very hard.
What are the countries?
We just hired someone in France actually, but we're currently hiring Brazil and Germany for my team. So if you speak Portuguese or German.
So what do you look for?
So we look for obviously some sort of translation background. It doesn't necessarily have to be professional. One of my team members in Tokyo kind of talked me through this, and she was never a formal professional translator, but her English is good enough, and her Japanese is obviously good enough. So obviously some advanced grasp of each language, in our case like English and whatever other language. And then editorial judgment. It's so much about being obsessed with the audience, and not just your audience, but the media within that country, because something that we can do is if the culture or if the media industry in Spain doesn't do a lot of X content, but the US does, maybe we can try that there in a low risk way, and that's our competitive advantage. So it's not just knowing about each individual post per se, or video, or cartoon, or whatever, but it's knowing about the context in which you're providing that to the audience.
So I still want to know, are cats the universal language?
I think there are different animal preferences, but I'm not sure. There are different food preferences, though,
Okay, so
that's
talk about
fun. So one of the fun things I learned was that the word bacon is very, there are different ways to say it across different Spanishes, and they're very particular. Latin America says bacon, I don't even remember, a different way than the Spanish, in Spain say bacon. And we once translated a food video where we had to use Spanish as I forgot which bacon we used, but the whole comment section was but why did you spell bacon this way? And it's so funny because you learn those things, and I have someone on my team who's literally reading BuzzFeed all day and learning this. I actually described her as she's machine learning, but as a human. So that's the world we live in. Another example was we had posted this, it's another food example, because everyone eats, universal, finding that overlap. So our French team posted this video, and this was in February, about some fresh tomato recipe. And I think the comment she wrote was a really great recipe for your Wednesday or something. I don't know, something like that. And the whole comment section there was where do you get fresh tomatoes in the dead of winter? And I was oh, that's so French. So it's about learning all these things without kind of couching yourself in stereotypes, but then laughing when they come true.
Especially in America,
Yeah.
as an American.
Yeah.
I speak 1.1 languages.
Yeah.
I didn't go abroad till I was 24. We're just too cloistered here.
Yeah.
And it really helps, I think, that the internet, above all else, connects us around the world.
Yeah, my job wouldn't exist maybe
Exactly.
I mean, it didn't exist a year ago. It didn't exist till November. So,
Well, thank you very much.
yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you.
At Millie, follow her.
Next, we'd like to have up Michelle Ferrier. Michelle is a magnificent journalism professor, entrepreneurial journalism professor, one of the real leaders in our field, and a pioneer. And we're delighted to have Michelle here at our, if you're a journalism teacher, July 15, the Entrepreneurial Journalism Educators Summit will be here at CUNY. So Michelle's coming for that too. We're always grateful to have you here.
Yes, great.
But you're here today because you have had a special project you've worked on, a personal passion,
Yes.
called Trollbusters.
Right.
Tell us what that is.
So Trollbusters is really what I call a just-in-time rescue service for online harassment for women writers and women journalists. And so what we do is go into Twitter and really try to provide a hedge of protection around targets. A lot of work goes into blocking the trolls or doing technology solutions to try and eliminate the trolls, but I don't think that's fruitful in any way. And so what I began to really look at was what were the ways that we could really support journalists in staying online in the face of online harassment. And so what we do is work on Twitter and flood their stream when we're alerted that troll behavior is happening. We flood their stream with positive messages as well as just-in-time education to help them protect themselves both online and off.
Does it work?
Yes.
What are some examples of rescues you've done?
So the types of things that we see, it really ranges because I think when people think about trolls, they really don't have a nuanced view of what online harassment is. And online harassment is a very large spectrum of behavior. bullying and cyberbullying for young people, to what we're seeing and dealing with Trollbusters, which really has to do with the really extreme types of online harassment. Women, and particularly women journalists and women writers, get the most egregious types of hate tweets. And those hate tweets can range from everything from rape threats to death threats to bodily harm to people sending them very vile and very violent types of videos in order to disturb them emotionally and to get them to go dark and go offline. And so what we try and do is really flood the Twitter stream with positive messaging. We also begin to monitor that feed so that if we do need to go to law enforcement, we can. And we actually are exploring. We've had people ask us, why just women writers and women journalists? I have a personal connection to the issue, which is why we started there. But I also work on a case-by-case basis with men who are dealing with these issues. And so the whole spectrum of behavior has just really blown up in the past year, with people really getting a much deeper understanding of what's happening online and the types of trolls that we're dealing with that are very, very different than the teen boy in a basement that has self-esteem issues.
Thank you for doing this. I think we're all very grateful that this exists. The website is troll-busters.com, and her handle is Media Ghosts.
That's my
So tell us-
personal
yeah,
handle.
yeah, okay.
And when we do some of our rescue stuff, and as well as our channel, it's Your SOS Team.
Your SOS Team, TEAM,
Right.
wonderful.
So the idea is to really come in and help them persist online in the face of the work that they're doing.
And what's an unusual story that would help us understand this?
Oh gosh, there's a couple of issues. And so the types of people who get attacked and the trolling behavior is very different. The gentleman that we worked with, his was a very interesting case because one, these online behaviors mirror the kinds of offline gender behaviors that we've seen for years. However, in physical space and physical stalking, as we know, in domestic violence, at the local level, really, law enforcement has swung to supporting women, which I think it should. However, it also sometimes victimizes men who are the target as well, rather than the perpetrator. And in this case, I worked with a young man whose ex-girlfriend targeted him online with fake profiles on Facebook, where she implicated him in child pornography. Destroyed his reputation. He lost his job, lost several jobs as a result of it, and then carried that behavior into online and had him both online and offline stalking, and kept those injunctions going so that he could not get out from under this net that she'd cast. And so in that sense, us putting something into the feed in Twitter wasn't really what he needed. He needed additional services. And so we worked with him to put together his evidence for court. And I'm really, really, really happy to say that both the online and the offline charges have been dropped. And the judge has said to the state, do not bring this case before me without doing your due diligence.
Yeah, very good.
So, these behaviors, women and men, are a part of this dynamic. And people, I believe, can be trolls on any issue. Anybody can be a troll. So it's not as if, it's not as if we can predict who's going to be trolls, but actually there is technology that is coming out that's able to look at your language patterns, et cetera. And I think it's with almost close to 90% specificity determine whether you are likely to become a troll. So there's predictive technologies that are being developed.
You're all getting a test before you leave.
Yeah, so predictive technologies, again, to block the trolls. But the behavior is very, very damaging. There's emotional effects. So just like with physical rape and physical violence, there's a silencing effect, a chilling effect on the journalist and their ability to be able to do their job. There's emotional effects where they're isolated from their family and their communities and their friends who don't understand the dynamic of the behavior that they're going through. And there's economic effects. Think about a freelancer or stringer whose article for a particular publication blows up and then goes to try and get another job, and somebody Googles them and sees all this nasty trolling activity happening. They're more likely not to hire them to not bring that into their own space. And so there's long-term identity and reputation issues that come along with this.
So this last week, John Weissman, who's an editor of the New York Times, rather now famously dumped Twitter, and he said, and I quote his tweet, "I will leave Twitter to the racists, the anti-Semites, the Bernie bros who attacked women reporters yesterday. Maybe Twitter will rethink." What's your view of the responsibility of all the platforms? Twitter is the one because it's the most open, it gets the most problems. What, if anything, could Twitter do to help?
I've been very straight with them in that they're profiting from other people's pain. They make a profit. They make money, and they need to put that money back into strong moderation and being more responsive to people whose lives are being destroyed because of the speed and because of the ferociousness of swarm activity that happens. So there's troll activity where it's just one-off kinds of behavior, one person coming after you, like we saw with Gamergate and some of these other kinds of activities in Bernie Bros. There's a pile-on effect, and trying to come out from under that while still doing your job online, I can tell you from experiences that that's a really challenging thing to do. And so not only do the platforms need to really take responsibility and stop abdicating that responsibility to the public to police this, and really put some strong policies in place. And I believe they're trying, but a lot of this is cultural. A lot of this is nuanced. And it's very difficult if you're using even machine learning or natural language processing to get context. And so we try and do a little bit of proactive work with troll busters. Sometimes somebody will be like, "I'm going to kill you." And we look at that tweet and we try and look at what the conversation has been around it. And sometimes we just very politely put a little warning tweet in there saying, "Troll Busters is watching." And sometimes people laugh and they share it with their friends because they're like, "Oh, somebody's watching what I'm doing online," and that causes them to pause. And we've actually found just even putting our warning tweets into a stream, if they're one-off trolls, they'll stop because they're not quite sure what we're capable of doing and whether we're able to find them. But when you're talking about Gamergate and a pile-on effect of these swarms and smart mobs, it's very difficult because they are anonymous, they know how to use the networks. It's very difficult to trace their IP. We don't have the sophisticated digital forensics to be able to really dig in and get their identity. And so people really drown in the hateful tweets that come at them.
Do you find, I've seen trolls myself, and let me be clear here, as a privileged white male, I don't suffer anything like others do, but you get a preview of what goes on in terms of the structure of it and how they operate. The ability to make a new account and a new account and a new account and a new account, and then start doing the same thing.
Yes.
I would think that that's an area where you can recognize the patterns. Who's being attacked? What's happening? How quickly it's coming back?
Who else have they attacked?
Yeah.
Right, and actually that's some of the things that we're working on as well. So right now we act in a reactive way when we're alerted through our reporting tool. But one of the things that we're looking at is really a much more comprehensive monitoring system using natural language processing, machine learning to really be more predictive in looking at conversations that are happening around hashtags, look at the opinion leaders and voices that are speaking in those areas, find the trolls, and then be able to go in and rescue the people that they're attacking.
I'm just looking to see if this is online or not. Yes, so last year at Newsgeist, which is this wonderful event held by the Knight Foundation and also Google, you gave an emotional, personal, raw, amazing talk at a Knight Talk. I believe it's up on YouTube.
It is.
So I don't want to make you live through that again and talk about that, but I think we should mention, if it's okay with you,
No,
that
that's
Trollbusters came from your own experience and from trying to rescue others. If Trollbusters had been around when you suffered this, how much of a difference would it have made?
So a little bit of backstory. 10 years ago, I was the first African-American columnist at a newspaper in Florida, and almost immediately started receiving hate mail, the traditional mail as well as email. Normally shrug that off, had a special folder, put them into the special folder. You try and shrug that off. However, very soon into my career as a columnist, there was one person that began to attack me systematically over time and send little manifestos through the mail to me. And the newspaper had no idea how to deal with this. And many newspapers don't have any policies on how to deal with this kind of issue. And so first letter, shrug off, second letter, kind of shrug off, third letter, go to the police and try and get local law enforcement to look into this. And got to the point where police are patrolling my home. My kids had cell phones to try and protect us from this person, because it became very clear from the rhetoric and the language of how they were attacking me that this was an organized hate group, and this was a tactic of organized hate groups to shut down diverse voices, both in the newspaper as well as online. And so when I began to explore with other columnists and began to talk to professional organizations about how they dealt with this, it became very clear there was no policies and no clear pathway, and that many people of color and women journalists had just quietly exited journalism into strategic communications or PR and just left behind and abandoned their careers because of this kind of activity. And so I started then a project called Spot Hate, which was using GIS technology to map hate crimes that were reported in newspapers to see if we could discover a pattern of incidences based on these reports and see if we could track the hate groups. And so I worked with the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they didn't have their database online at the time. They now have a map database of organized hate groups that they've put online. So you can go to your own state and see what kinds of groups and where these groups are operating. But they didn't have that at the time. And so my case went from the local law enforcement to the FBI to the CIA to all different kinds of professional organizations, no activity. And it was finally the Committee to Protect Journalists, those people that you know, really to be associated with people who they are supporting on the front lines in war zones. The war zones have come to our own neighborhood doorsteps, people. And so the Committee to Protect Journalists stepped in, took up my case, and took it to the Department of Justice to get them to investigate. But unfortunately, the Department of Justice was dealing with our new African-American president, who brought all of the hate groups out of the woodwork with a vengeance. And so the fact that he's still alive 8 years later, I'm very surprised, because they were so overwhelmed with what was happening with Obama during his inauguration. They had no bandwidth to deal with a little reporter in Florida. So I left my job at the newspaper and went into higher education.
But didn't forget the pain, didn't
No.
forget that, and came back to rescue others. And I'm grateful for what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
For those in the room, also check the monitors over there. That's the Facebook Live feed that's going out. Please do mention it again. And Annie Berman is watching in case any questions come in. We can also do that. Jennifer Preston.
Share it. You can all share, yeah.
You can all share, please do. So Jennifer Preston used to work right next door at the New York Times, as well as all around it in the New York media scene at Newsday and elsewhere. And now
New York Newsday.
New York Newsday. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
We're still sensitive about it.
I know. And now at the Knight Foundation, the leading supporter of journalistic activities. And full disclosure, I run something called the Tau Knight Center, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. And so Jennifer's in town for Social Media Weekend, and has had a relationship with Sree for years, so we thought we'd have you up just to talk about kind of you and social and journalism and technology and where it's gone. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, the first thing I want to say is that one of the things that makes me so proud about working now at Knight Foundation is that Knight Foundation funded Michelle Ferrier's TrollBusters.com under the Prototype Fund. And it's just one of just many excellent examples where Knight Foundation is not only supporting terrific journalism, but also new ways and new tools and ways that people are using digital media.
Let's go back first for just a minute.
Yes.
Because you were the vaunted, august New York Times. I remember having a big discussion on blogs with Bill Keller in the day about trying to make them friendly to blogs, and Bill was kind of growling
And
about
links.
it. And links, right? Let alone letting those voices into the paper, let alone letting the reporters talk to others. You were the absolute vanguard there, and you brought it along. Give us a little bit of memory lane about something as an institution like the New York Times and how you got them into social and what you've seen since.
Great question, thank you. One of the things that I did at the New York Times as the first social media editor and working with journalists and trying to be in that role as an evangelist is to always tie these incredibly powerful tools to the journalism. So I found it pretty easy to get reporters to use Twitter, use Facebook once they learned how these tools were so powerful and so necessary for reporting, for tracking trends, keeping on top of breaking news, finding sources. And what was, of course, and we all know, is what is most powerful of all is when journalists use these tools to actually engage with users and engage them in the news gathering process. So that's what I found was the most effective way to win the hearts and minds. And I have to tell you, Barbara Gray was just amazing. So when
Barbara,
I went
who was at research at the New York Times, is now the head of our research training
here at
She was
CUNY.
on Social Media Weekend earlier today.
She was on Social Media Weekend earlier today, and if you have not seen Barbara's presentation, you must go to the videotape and see it, because I recall going to the Washington Bureau, and I knew that the way that I would be able to get journalists in the Washington Bureau onto Twitter is for them to see Barbara show how she used these tools, including many of the tools that Sree taught me about at Columbia for journalism.
I want to point out to everyone that when the New York Times hired its first social media editor, they didn't hire some newbie or some very young intern and try to do it, because they knew it's about the journalism and it's about the diplomatic and political skills that you had to make that happen, right? So that's, I think, an important part of this. And I always quote Jennifer, who voluntarily taught with me for 3 or 4 years. She said 5 words that I repeat all the time that show excellent judgment on Twitter. That's
you
the,
quoted at the beginning of the day today.
yeah. And I tell people, please think about that every time you tweet, someone is making a decision about you and how you behave. And we should also mention that the first time I saw you cover the Fort Hood shootings now several years ago, as well as Sandy Hook, transformed for a lot of people. How do you verify journalism when it's happening in real time and you get the real-time blog? So if you want to mention some tips for people who are watching now.
Sure. I think what's been really exciting about these tools is to see how newsrooms have been using them for audience development, and how we have really strong audience development teams, and just all the wonderful ways that we've seen BuzzFeed, share and distribute content on multiple platforms in really powerful and compelling ways. But the one thing that I think is really important and that we must not lose in newsrooms is how to use these tools for news gathering, and how to gather user-generated content, the incredible video that's being just produced every minute of the day by ordinary people all over the world, and how to surface that. Markham is a genius at finding content, and not only how to find it, but how to verify it, because the most important relationship that we have with our readers, with our users, we know is trust, and it's hard to build it. And as Josh Stearns wrote as part of the First Draft Coalition recently, it's really easy, it can be very quickly broken. So the same standards that you bring to your reporting as a journalist, you have to bring them to your work when you're curating and using social media. So with my students here at Columbia, and I also taught social journalism at CUNY, I would quote this guy, Bob Dylan. You may have heard of him, okay? And it's like very simple. If it's not right, it's wrong. And guess what? If it's wrong, you don't put it in the paper, you don't put it on the Twitter, you don't snap it, and you certainly don't share it. So that's my most important advice is just to bring the rigor of journalism to these incredibly powerful tools.
So now you're at Knight, and,
Yes.
and this incredibly powerful institution again. That really, I know you've taken a tour of newsrooms around the country.
Yes.
You're constantly talking to people in newsrooms. And in a way, I think your job is to see what's missing and what's needed in this business where so much is missing and so much is needed. What are the priorities that you see going forward? I know the Knight Foundation is doing a big project of trying to rethink the strategy of the world, which I think is a good idea. I'm eager to hear what the outcome of that will be. In the intersection of journalism and technology, what do you see as priorities that we should all be paying attention to?
So Knight Foundation is committed to advancing the practice of journalism in the digital age. So what that means is we are looking to accelerate the digital transformation of traditional institutions and legacy newsrooms, because we think they are producing very strong journalism. At the same time, Knight is very committed to promoting and helping support new methods, new forms, and new models. Like, for example, here in New York, Knight supports the mobile lab at the US Guardian, which just produced a really interesting news around experiments around push notifications. But what are we finding most important, of course, is how people are consuming journalism, news, and information differently. And so that means it's about social, it's about mobile, it's about every single thing that you have heard about today. And journalists need to really be focused on their users. They really need to understand how consumers are changing pretty rapidly and about how they are getting journalism. At the same time, Knight is absolutely committed to supporting terrific investigative reporting. We support, of course, the great work here in New York that ProPublica is doing here and around the country, and bringing it back to social, the work that Amanda Zamora, who just left ProPublica to take on a great new role at the Texas Tribune, has done at ProPublica, again, really using social messaging apps and all sorts of really exciting ways to engage the public and members of the public and readers in the news gathering process.
Thought maybe we could take a question from the audience.
Great.
So if you have a question, let us know.
And we have a hand held up
Yeah.
here. Since I'm mic'd up, hold on,
hold on.
I'll get it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, maybe your mic's still on. By the way, she's at Jennifer Preston. Please follow her on Twitter.
So Jennifer, you talked about legacy media and the work that the Knight Foundation does there, but some of the other work I do is around media deserts and
Yes.
places that don't have access to fresh news and information. So what is Knight doing to seed journalism in places that have never had good journalism,
That's
local journalism?
That's a great question. So Knight has currently $5 million in the field supporting the local media initiative, and we're now reviewing that, and we are working very closely with Tom Glazier and the Democracy Fund to do some research to help identify, where are the bright spots? Because yes, while there are news deserts, there are opportunities and potential partners, and they may not be traditional journalists. And that's where we think that there may be an opportunity for us to invest
The Democracy
in.
Fund is doing mapping of the total
Yes.
ecosystem around news.
Yes.
And we have to get out of the mind that news organizations are the only ones who do news now. Obviously, the
Absolutely.
public does, the platforms are involved. It's a complex ecology that we live in now. We have another,
Quick question, yeah.
yeah, Mike,
Okay,
yes.
my question, actually, it's a bit off subject. It's for this young lady here who is with Media Ghosts. in that you're going after trolls. My question is, you're going after trolls who are going after reporters. There's also trolling going on in the employment industry, whereby a dear friend of mine was a whistleblower for the state of New Jersey. Because her lawsuit was in Google, it took her 4 years to find a job.
Right.
Is there some kind of service like that for other industries besides protecting reporters?
So as I said, my mic's still hot, so I'm good. So as I said, we've been looking at certain cases, and absolutely we've run into those people who are public figures or advocates around specific issues, Toyota's whistleblowers around the sudden acceleration issue, et cetera, where they are being trolled from inside corporations and outside corporations because they are whistleblowers. And that gets into a longer-term digital identity and reputation management issue, helping to work with those individuals to really, over time, overcome the speed and the persistence of information on social media. So that's a real challenge and very different kind of dynamic and that's why I said we're getting much more nuanced about the different kind of trolling behaviors and how to be able to handle those differently. And so we do work with some of those cases and are trying to figure out what are the kinds of services and supports that those types of folks need. They may need witness protection. And that might be something that we could offer, or blind job support, something that allows them to be able to still maintain a living and support themselves. You're welcome.
Next.
One more question?
So I just got back from a trip to Europe where in Germany there was a summit about distributed content. At the Newsgeist in Europe that Knight is not so much involved in as it's Google's, but there was a lot of progress there, I thought, in trying to reset the relationship of the publishers to the platforms. And what I've seen is that I think the most valuable thing we can get from the platforms, we in media, is data about our users, to have a relationship, the kind of relationship we talk about, to know
Absolutely.
our users better. And there's been reluctance from the platforms because they kind of say, what data? So I tried to force the question in this
What
trip.
data?
Well, but we were just saying we want data, we want data. So if we asked more
You want the
specifically,
email address.
yeah, that'd be a little hard in European
It's
privacy.
not hard.
But I think the question is further is how do we help know our users better? What is it about their behavior, their interests, their desires? And we got to more specific questions about how we could get that kind of information from the platforms in a way that respects privacy. And I saw real progress there that goes to that. What about the relationship that you see of media companies to the technology platforms, the relationship between New York and Silicon Valley? How do you sense the current relationship there?
Well, one of the things that I've observed in my travels around the country, because I spent 30 years here in New York, and I was so lucky to be at the Times at a place where there was a lot of experimentation and commitment to innovation. That's not the case at a lot of news organizations around the country. And one thing that I would like to see, and I would like to see Knight Foundation help facilitate, is more focus on local journalism, more focus on the online news sites at the local level. It's not difficult to get the attention of the Facebook partnership folks when you work at the New York Times. When I was the social media editor, I would convene everybody. Remember, you guys would come.
Yeah, we were there the first meeting.
For my breakfast,
With
because
Chloe,
I thought it, with Chloe Sladden of Twitter, because I thought it was really important for all of us to learn from each other as we were learning how to work with the technology platforms. But what I've observed around the country is that's not happening at the local level.
So
I
they need
think
better bridges and more connections.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the bottom line. We all know that there's tremendous opportunity for publishers to use these platforms to find and build new audiences. At the same time, we have to recognize that the growing concentrated power of these social and technology platforms is really changing the way that people are going to be able to get information. And there is not enough transparency around that, and that has to change. There needs to be more transparency about algorithms, about the data, because that's a threat, and we have to be aware of it and deal with it. At the same time, recognize that these platforms are just enormously powerful. I mean, you can learn so much about and find so much about your content and your audience. I hate that word, audience. Your community.
Thank you.
Your community.
Thank you. Or even market would be better than audience.
Yeah, using these platforms. I remember while at the New York Times, we had this wonderful Civil War blog, and it was recreating updates on the Civil War during the anniversary. So what we did was we used Facebook to find people who were interested in the Civil War. You can use these platforms in all sorts of interesting ways. And we liked all those pages. We created a Civil War page. And people who might not have thought of the New York Times as a publisher of great content around the Civil War were able to discover it.
And the great thing about that is it doesn't try to, it gets away from the mass view. At no time do I imagine the New York Times thought that every single reader of its 60 million people would
Correct.
be interested in the Civil War. But they knew there'd be an intense interest
Absolutely.
from a community
Yeah,
of
yeah,
people, and they can serve
yeah.
them.
Well, I'll tell you one project that we're looking at now to fund at night, and we could really use your help. We have seen how many single topic news sites are just been doing amazing work.
Syria Deeply, Chalkbeat.
Yes, Chalkbeat, Syria Deeply, News Deeply, the Marshall Project, which just won a Pulitzer Prize, Inside Climate News, which has won a Pulitzer Prize, Hechinger Report, which Liz Willens, team of just incredible
Higher education, yep.
Higher education. But they've been struggling many of them, to find an audience, to really bring on some of the sophisticated approaches that like BuzzFeed and other more savvy online news sites are using analytics and other sorts of tools. So we're looking to help support various experiments with these single topic news sites, bring them together as a community so that they can learn from each other, invite Millie and Aaron Edwards from BuzzFeed and our great friends there to share some tips, and because we believe that these tools and these platforms are enormously powerful to find and build an audience. But you got to keep an eye on them.
Great. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm honored that we have Sree and Social Media Weekend here. It's just great. I'm also honored that all of you are here. And one of the great things about this metaphorically is we have real people here all around the room. We have cameras there for the broadcast and podcast, and we have the new camera here. And if you look there, you'll see in slight delay me pointing to it. Nathan, thank you from Mevo for coming. And on a little tiny, hey, we are honored to be one of the pioneers, to be among the first to use the Mevo camera. And I can't wait to imagine what we can do with this. We can make talk shows, cooking shows, all kinds of shows without the need for a lot of rigmarole, and it's going to be very exciting to play with. So I'll do the old-fashioned thing for a moment to that camera to say, that's it, dotNYC for another week. Thank you very much. Bye.